There we go. Sides. All right. Hello, YouTube. Are we good to go? Hello, 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 my friends. It's Jill Osborne from the IT Network. It is Sunday, March 31st. Oh, here, hold on a second. I gotta look at something real quick. Okay, good. Whoops. It is Sunday, March 31st, and it's Easter. So for everybody who celebrates Easter, I wish you the happiest of Easters. Normally, I would try to be with family, but I cannot drive to my sister's house because of my surgery. I'm lucky to be able to drive 5 miles right now, much less 30 miles round trip. So I am home for Easter. And I figured, you know what? If I'm home for Easter, I know that there are other IT patients that are home for Easter too. So I thought, what the heck? Maybe we should try to do a support group meeting just out of curiosity. Now, let me just, oh, my light's being all weird. Let me get this down. You know, I have to use these big pieces of paper on the window to stop the shine. Like, what the sun was perfect, and now it's all weird again. Okay, so anyway, we'll take that down for now. It's a gorgeous day here in California. Oh, hi, Gay. I am so. Hi, Donna. I'm so. I'm in the nitty gritty of healing right now. I didn't have very much pain medicine last week, so I kind of suffered a wee bit. And this morning, I woke up with quite a bit of pain, so I used a little tiny bit, a quarter of a pain med. So, but that was at 8 o'clock, so it's out now, and so I'm perfectly capable of doing a support group meeting. And such. Where does estrogen go? In the urethra of the vagina? Can you use a pea size instead of an applicator? Well, a pea size is not going to deliver enough quantity to your vagina. Yes, you can use it in both places for sure. In fact, I used mine last night because my urethra was being a little funky as I was going to bed. So for me personally, I tend to chase the symptoms. If I'm having vaginal discomfort, then I'm going to use it in my vagina. If I'm having urethral discomfort, I'm going to use it in my urethra. There's no right or wrong answer. It's about where do you feel and what's going on there. Let's see. So we've got Donna on YouTube, and we've got a couple of people here on Facebook. So normally when I do these meetings, we have a lot of people. Each meeting is usually watched 300 or 400 times on YouTube, and then on Facebook another couple hundred times. So a lot of people come to these meetings and watch them after the fact recorded. Normally when I do these meetings, I have a little 30-minute intro, some sort of educational content, and then usually go ahead and take your questions. Oh my God. Yes, I have something very important. Almost forgot. Holy moly. I was actually going to read you something today that I thought was really important, but as I was going to bed last night, looking at some of the new research, we had something very interesting. This is a pet project for me. Y'all know that when I got my pharmacology degree, I was fascinated by drug-resistant infections. I'm fascinated by microbiology. I've said all this time, if I could go back to grad school, I would want to study microbiology. So I got to find it. Hold on. This is big. This is really, really big. What's new at the National Institutes of Health? Okay. This is, in my opinion, So incredibly important for our future, especially for patients with Hunner's lesions. So published last month out of Taiwan is a new study that is evaluating the effectiveness of an antiviral treatment for patients with Hunner's lesions. So let me give you the foundation here. Hunner's lesions affect 5 to 10% of the IC patient population. Hunner's lesion patients absolutely have the most severe form of IC. These are the patients who have not historically responded to bladder therapies. These are the patients who struggle with the most pain. They've got a lot of blood in their urine and they're often down to eating 4 to 5 foods. And they have been an enigma. They have been a mystery. Why do Hunner's lesions occur? Well, now about 6, 7 years ago, we had some research from Europe where they were studying the urine of patients with Hunner's lesions, and they made a rather remarkable discovery that they consistently found active viral infection in the urine of patients with Hunner's lesions, not found in those of us who don't have Hunner's lesions. Now, the other thing we have to really understand about Hunner's lesions is when you biopsy them, it's biological war happening in that tissue. Massive inflammation, massive, massive, massive inflammation happening inside a Hunner's lesion. Inflammation means that your body's defenses have been activated to search and destroy. Yeah. So, Europeans, again, were the first to find virus. And what they found was a virus called the polyomavirus. And later studies also found Epstein-Barr. Epstein-Barr is associated with mononucleosis. Now, of course, the Europeans started producing this research, and the American experts were remarkably silent about it. We were all going, guys, what do you think about this pretty important breakthrough about Hunner's lesions? And for years, for like 5 years, we were waiting for any American expert to come forward and say, whoa, that's fascinating. Like it was us, the patients. It was me. I was the one who was really talking about this consistently. What we didn't know was that the MAP Research Network, which is part of the U.S. National Institutes of Health, took that very seriously. And they were doing their own viral research. And what did they find? Virus, polyomavirus, in the urine of patients with Hunner's lesions. So we're like going, okay, this is really cool. Great. Now we've got a target. Now we've got something we might be able to treat. Hello, antiviral, anybody? Well, again, those medical authorities, they want research. They're like, well, we're not going to recommend an antiviral until we've got proof that an antiviral will actually help these patients. So a couple of years, we're like, okay, you found the virus. Are you going to recommend people start testing for the virus, and you're going to recommend antivirals? And I actually sent an email to one of my European colleagues, and it's like, you look at the European guidelines for the diagnosis of IC, they want you to test for virus. And I said, okay, so you test for virus, but what do you do when you find the virus? And their answer was not much, because we don't really know what to do. We didn't really have the research showing that an antiviral therapy would be effective. And I just heard that again, like in the last month or so. At one of the meetings that I was at, I actually think I probably asked that question. And I said, well, are you testing for virus? And they were like, why? We don't know how to treat it anyway. Yeah, that was in a meeting that I was in probably a month ago. Now we have the second study that is showing that antiviral therapy is beneficial. So I'm going to read this for you. So again, this is from Taiwan. Our previous study showed that the Epstein-Barr virus may be the etiology for some patients with IC-BPS. Hence, this current study is aimed to investigate the urinary viral spectrum in patients with IC and the clinical efficacy of valacyclovir. So 28 patients were prospectively enrolled for valacyclovir 500 milligrams twice a day for a month, 4 weeks. Urine samples were collected from IC patients and 30 controls. And the primary outcome was the difference in pain levels, as well as changes in the urinary viral spectrum, along with what we call cytokine levels. In this study, urinary Epstein-Barr was detected in 14.2% of IC patients, but in no controls, none. And the urinary polyoma JC virus and BK virus were detected in 18, 64%, and let's see, hold on a sec. Urinary, okay, polyoma, okay, this is a fun, guys, remember, they translate this, and so the English translation is a little funky. So the polyoma JC and the BK virus were detected in 18 and 2. So 18 of these patients, or 64% of these patients, had polyoma JC, and 2 had polyoma BK. Again, none in controls. No cytomegalovirus, varicella zoster virus, or herpes simplex virus was detected in any of the urine samples. The pain levels and symptoms significantly decreased after 4 weeks with valacyclovir treatment, and the urinary Epstein-Barr virus was undetectable in any sample after treatment. And they also showed decreases in markers of inflammation like interleukins, so IL-1B, IL-8, IL-10, and tumor necrosis factor, et cetera, et cetera. They were significantly reduced. This study showed that antiviral therapy could relieve bladder pain, eliminate urinary Epstein-Barr, and reduce bladder inflammation. Now, I haven't read the full article. I've not had time to read the full article, but I'm going to do something very big with this in our next magazine. Because, I mean, I for a couple of reasons. Number one, Hunner's lesion patients are struggling. We need effective treatments for Hunner's lesions. We do, desperately. Sorry, there's like a little white thing on my glasses here, being very weird. So it is in all of our interests, and it is a compassionate thing to do to make sure that we are studying treatments specifically for Hunner's lesions. But also, there is this tremendous impression across the internet that IC patients have hidden infections, specifically what we call a fastidious bacterial infection. And if you've been online about IC in the last 5 years, you know that there is a lot of very aggressive discussions going on, with some people saying every single IC patient actually has a bacterial infection that they simply have not found, and that every single patient should be on antibiotics. And of course, if you've watched any of my meetings, you know that I completely disagree with that, because we have subtypes, we have phenotypes. For many of us, IC is completely neuromuscular and has nothing to do with the bladder. In fact, I was working with a patient yesterday who called on a Saturday, and I picked up, and it's kind of that same thing. She's completely normal bladder. They've looked in her bladder 3 times. Bladder therapies are not working for her at all. She goes to have a pelvic floor assessment. She has pelvic floor tension. Obviously, that's where she needs to be spending her time. But again, for those patients with Hunner's lesions and those patients who are completely convinced that they have infection, You can pursue that now. We can pursue that now, once and for all. So you can have a next generation DNA test, which will help us determine if you've got bad pathological bacteria or if you have fungal infection. And hopefully we will, in fact, I pitched Microgen. I don't know if they were willing to go there or not. I actually asked them to consider creating a diagnostic kit specifically for IC patients that would combine bacterial, fungal, and viral identification so that you would get that answer once and for all. If next generation testing comes back clean and they find no fungus and they find no virus and they find no pathogenic bacteria and you have a normal bladder on cysto, then obviously we got to look beyond the bladder. We have to look at muscles and nerves. Now, another patient that I was working with, although it might have been the patient I was working with yesterday, you kind of have to bear with me because, again, I'm recovering from sudden, unexpected, and quite major surgery. I got my pathology reports back, by the way, this week. My gallbladder was completely blocked. I mean, it really was an emergency. Holy moly, I had no idea. Okay. I was working with another patient who was found herself in a really strange position because she was in between doctors who were disagreeing with each other. So she's got all the symptoms of IC. She's got completely normal bladder on cysto. Nothing is showing significantly as a potential cause for all of her bladder symptoms. She goes to a urologist who does a cystoscopy, and the urologist goes, I see a dent in your bladder right now. So imagine she's laying on her back, she's in stirrups. The doctor has done a cystoscopy, is looking at her bladder, and her bladder basically has a wedge in it from the top. Like something's pushing into her bladder. And the doctor was very clear. I see something pushing into your bladder significantly. I think it's a fibroid tumor. I think you've got fibroid tumors pushing into your bladder, that would explain your symptoms. So then she goes to a couple of different urogynecologists who completely poo-poo it. And it's like, well, we don't see that. We don't see that at all. But have you done the test to look for it? And the answer was, oh, fibroid tumors really don't cause a lot of bladder symptoms. And as I said to her, I said, well, we've got the research study that proves that fibroid tumors pushing on the bladder can cause urinary symptoms. And more importantly, when that fibroid tumor is fixed or removed or resected out, the urinary symptoms go away. So that was very, very, very interesting. And then I was working with another patient, but I might have talked about this last week. You have to bear with me, who had next generation DNA testing done. And she had 3 bacteria, dominant bacteria in her urine I had never heard of. Never. And listen, I mean, I've gone through a lot of next gen testing with patients. I had never heard of these very rare infections, one of which was associated with a heart infection, like a really significant risk of sepsis and developing an infection in the heart. And the question that I asked her was, gosh, man, your immune system really sounds compromised. I mean, I've never seen these types of infections in the bladder. You're the first in 30 years, and certainly the first in the last 10 years that we've been doing next generation testing. And I said, God, it really sounds like your immune system is compromised. And she goes, well, yeah, it is. They told me it is. My IgG levels are really, really low. I was like, okay, so, and she's like, well, what do I do? Do I treat the infection? And my answer was, well, yeah, you're going to have to potentially treat the infection, but far more importantly, we got to treat the IgG levels. I mean, what did the doctor say they should do about boosting your immune system? And I did talk about this last week in the meeting. I'm pretty sure I did. And the answer, of course, was IgG infusions, which she had kind of poo-pooed. So ultimately, in the end, it's all about cause and effect. IC is not this mysterious incurable bladder disease. We don't think about it that way anymore, and that's what our national AUA guidelines say, that no bladder disease is found in the great majority of IC patients. Although now we've got the viral infections in Hunner's lesion, so that is a distinct virus. But for other patients, we have to look for the underlying cause. And the underlying cause is often going to be a problem with muscles, a problem with nerves, could be fibroid tumors pushing on the bladder. If you're a woman who's working with another patient who she also was struggling, and talking with patients, it's you guys are always challenging for me because it's kind of like trying to find a needle in the haystack. And so I'm asking her all these questions and trying to go through subtypes. And after a good 45 minutes, she goes, "Well, it feels like a bowling ball in my bladder." And I'm like, "Oh, isn't that interesting? You haven't said that before." "Yeah, and it's really heavy, and it gets heavier as the day goes on." And it's like, "Oh, well, I can tell you what that is. That is most likely pelvic congestion syndrome when we go through that symptom of that." So anyway, you are an anatomical mystery to be solved. If you've been diagnosed with IC and you're not doing well on bladder therapies and you have a healthy bladder, what our guidelines say is stop what you're doing, take a step back, revisit the diagnosis, and let's see if we missed anything. Hello, Rhonda. I wish you a blessed Easter too. I do. Donna says, "How are the clinical trials doing?" The clinical trials, I haven't gotten a lot of updates on the clinical trials, to be quite honest. Um, the most promising clinical trial, which is that rectal foam, um, we just need to get more patients in that study. So a clinical trial is where you, the IC patient, can meet the best researchers in the United States, and they provide free medical care for the duration of the study. They will provide free care for your IC symptoms because you get to try the treatment that is under development. So every study is different. Every study is testing different types of things. But what we've had for the last 6 months are three studies that are focusing on reducing pain. And we have a study that is focusing on returning off pain using a foam treatment, kind of like Proctofoam for hemorrhoids. And they're hoping that that foam will turn off pain in the bladder when you put that foam in the rectum. So if anybody out there is really interested in participating in some of these really important clinical trials, come on over to the IC Network, icnetwork.org. They're right on the front page. We've got another clinical trial. Hopefully we'll be launching in the next couple of months. So anyway, that's kind of what's happening right now. Now, in May is the big American Urology Association conference. That's when our big IC research studies are released. And the abstracts have not been published yet. Although I did see a couple of preliminary abstracts and they looked awesome. Now we have a little bit of debate. There's been a little bit of debate among medical experts on the internet, and so early last week, a top doctor, somebody I really respected, said we shouldn't be releasing abstracts of studies to patients. Why are you doing that? That's a study. It's not, and it's a preliminary study. And they felt like patients didn't need to know about the research coming up, that we needed to save the patient education stuff for really strong, validated studies. Not that our abstracts are not validated, but they wanted more robust research proving that theory was correct. Like, for example, the viral theory. And I went in and I very patiently disagreed. And I said, listen, these new studies give you, the patient, hope. They prove to you that the IC research movement is happening. And it's my job as an educator to put them into context. There are a lot of people out there who will grab a research study and just throw it online and they won't give you context. So, for example, again, with this Taiwan viral study, this has a very strong foundation of research proving that viruses play a role in Hunner's lesions. And it is the second published study that is showing that an antiviral has merit, it has success. And it's also my job when I work, for example, on the National Institutes of Health IC research meetings or with any of the other professional meetings that I participate in, to remind those researchers that you come first. You come first. You, the patient, come first. That we can get lost in the research, we can get lost in the science, but we shouldn't be. We don't need to spend 30 years studying how, one cell changes into another cell, which changes into another cell in the bladder wall. We don't need to do that. That's good research, but for the limited amount of money that we have, we got to put that research money into a study that will lead to something that will help you in the next 5 years. So anyway, when I get those abstracts from AUA, we will be talking about them, but I won't be able to do it until the meeting starts because there is a restriction on that data. I don't want to lose my privileges. I would just tell you that what I thought early on looked spectacular. And there was one very, very specific study validating yet again our phenotypes, which is like, yes, this is what we need. And Donna says, thank you for standing up. Oh, I try. Girl, I try. Here, let me go here to Facebook here. Hold on a sec. So on a scale of 1 to 10 today, I'm like a 6. I'm not back, but I did walk down my hill and back this morning. And I'm sleeping a little bit better. But my incisions are still quite uncomfortable. All right, Val. Hello, Val. Is it possible to have access to the study? I would like to share it with my doctor. Yes. You know what I can do right now is let me, at least here on Facebook, let me grab the study and I will give you a link to it right now. You can just go ahead and print that out. All right, Facebook, there you go. There is the link to that study. Anne said, do you use estrogen, vaginal estrogen regularly? Yes, entirely. It's very important to use it regularly and consistently because this is estrogen acts to plump up those dry cells in your urethra and on your vulva and your vagina and your bladder. So using estrogen is the equivalent to putting a raisin in a glass of water. When you put a raisin in a glass of water, it plumps up, it absorbs that water. Well, when you give these dry shriveled cells estrogen, they plump up and they start producing the single most important thing you need, which is that nice, thick mucosal barrier, that mucus, which protects your bladder and your vagina and your vulva so that sex is comfortable, so that urine does not burn, and so that your bladder is not more sensitive. So using estrogen regularly is very, very important. Topical estrogen. Anne says, can you have IC with no pain and a clean cysto? Absolutely, Anne. So if you have a clean cysto, that means you've got a healthy bladder wall. That's great. Now we got to look beyond the bladder to the muscles and the nerves and any other things that could be causing your urinary symptoms. So absolutely. Florence says, Jill, it's gone from IC to IBS. What do you mean, Florence? So IBS is a related condition to IC. We now understand why. I mean, there are a couple of different mechanisms that help us understand why the bowel and the bladder are linked. Most importantly, they're linked by nerves in the spinal cord. So we have research that shows, and we call it the pepperoni pizza algorithm, that when you irritate the bowel, the bladder will also show signs of irritation, and vice versa. When you irritate the bladder, the bowel will show signs of irritation. We also know that the central nervous system has become very sensitive in patients with multiple pain conditions. So therapeutically for that IBS patient and that IC patient, we want to calm the central nervous system down. And we got to try to protect that bowel a little bit because when you got a sensitive bowel, you're going to have maybe have some issues with food too. Um, I had terrible IBS in my 20s, terrible IBS. I don't have IBS anymore. Um, and I kind of wonder, there's a part of me that, I mean, number one, I'm thrilled that I'm not bent over in agony every morning like I was for many years in my 20s. I think one of the reasons why is I've calmed my central nervous system down tremendously. I do my pelvic floor therapy now when and 9 times out of 10 if I flare, it's a muscle flare. 9.9 times out of 10 if I ever have a pelvic pain flare, it's from me tweaking my muscles in some way. But also I'm eating better. I'm not eating junk food anymore. My biome is in good shape. And I avoid those foods which mess me up. So there are some foods that mess me up, like eating cereal in the morning. The only cereal I eat in the morning is going to be an organic brown rice cereal. I always felt very nauseous and gassy if I ever ate Cheerios or Raisin Bran or anything like that. All right, there's a fabulous website, Help for IBS. Uh, Fabulous, fabulous website. Recommend it for everybody. And we also, just in the IC Network shop, we sell, in fact, you can see it on here. Let me grab it real quick. I'm wearing pink today. I'm wearing pink today because it's Easter. Okay. Heather's Tummy Fiber. This is the bomb. So Heather Van Voris wrote the book First Year IBS. And she built the website Help for IBS, just like I started the IT network almost 25 plus years ago. Where I went into patient support, she created products. And one of the products she created is this fabulous acacia fiber, which is a soluble fiber, which does not irritate the bowel at all. I can remember, listen, I have no shame. I'll talk about anything. I went through a period of time where I had terrible rectal pain, just terrible rectal pain. And my doctor said, Jill, it's a hemorrhoid. You got a little hemorrhoid on the inside. Well, I was making two big mistakes. The first mistake that I was making is I was eating the wrong type of fiber. I was eating a lot of granola. And when you load up on that fiber, yeah, you're going to have a big bowel movement, but it's an irritated bowel movement because insoluble fiber like granola is very rough on those sensitive nerves lining your bowel. So I was interviewing her, Heather Von Boris. She was in an online conference we did many years ago. And I explained, I said, I'm so annoyed because I need help. And so I'm eating fiber. And she goes, what type of fiber are you eating? I'm like, well, granola. She goes, the problem with that is it's too rough. It's insoluble. It does not dissolve in water. And it literally scratches and irritates your bowel as it's going through your bowel. People with IBS need a soluble fiber, something that dissolves in water. Hence her product, Heather's Tummy Fiber. It's fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And one of the points she makes is fiber is important not only if you're constipated, but also if you have diarrhea. Because ultimately your bowel needs fiber to function. So anyway, we have this in the IC Network shop. So I think we're out of the bags. But what we also have are these little travel packs. So we have these in the IT Network shop for anybody that's interested. So if you struggle with IBS, you struggle with your bowels, think soluble fiber. Soluble fiber. It's the bomb, literally in the best possible way. Lizzie says, I'm 34 years old, on birth control, I had kids. It's been a rough year of flare-ups on and off. I just got my estrogen levels checked. Finally waiting for the results. It's bad for my period. Feels like someone's kicking me in the crotch. Oh, wait, hold on. It's bad before my period. It feels like somebody's kicking me in the crotch. That's not a way we would describe your bladder. Does dairy make IC worse? I can't tell if it's endometriosis. My back hurts so bad, all down my legs. I'm terrified of getting more UTIs. I clean so much. Lizzie, Lizzie, you're describing pelvic floor dysfunction. Pain that's going to your back, pain that's shooting down your legs. You've had 2 children. Your pelvic floor is not the same pelvic floor that you had before you had babies. And if you were torn during those deliveries, then it's yet even more explainable. So my question for you, and so that's concept number 1, is what's going on with your muscles down there? Have you had a proper pelvic floor assessment? Then concept number 2, think about your bladder for a moment. It's the only organ in the human body designed to hold toxic waste because urine is waste. Urine is body waste. It contains ammonia and urea and all sorts of irritants. So how can the bladder hold ammonia for hours and hours at a time and not get damaged? It's an evolutionary marvel. Because it turns out your bladder's like your mouth. It's a hollow organ that's wet on the inside. There's a really thick, robust coating of mucus inside your bladder. And that mucus acts as a barrier. It protects everything. Unfortunately, that mucus is estrogen dependent. So when you're young and have lots of estrogen, you got lots of mucus, and your bladder's ability to defend itself is awesome. But if you're on birth control, if you're on Lupron, or you're perimenopausal or menopausal, you don't have the estrogen anymore. You've suppressed, well, for the birth control, it's suppressed it. The Lupron, it suppresses it. So what does it do? It reduces the production of mucus, and thus your bladder's ability to defend itself is now compromised by the birth control. So you've got 2 separate things that you've got to explore. We got to figure out if your pelvic floor, what's going on with your pelvic floor, because seriously, the pain down your legs, that's not your bladder. Absolutely muscle, it could be muscle squeezing nerves, could be sciatica, which is de facto proof you have pelvic floor dysfunction. But in the same sense, we now know that birth control can also kind of introduce a kind of early menopause, which makes the bladder more vulnerable. If I were to bet money, I'm going to say that I think it's likely your muscles that are the dominant problem. But please tell us, Lizzie, have you had the pelvic floor assessment? Mary says, do you need a prescription for next generation DNA testing? No, you don't. You can order it yourself at microgendx.com, but you will need a doctor to sign the form. Perla said, I just had a hysterectomy and I really think it triggered my IC. Perla, girl, I've been there. We're both just recovering from surgery right now. Although I had my hysterectomy 7 years ago now. I had my gallbladder removed 2 weeks ago. So, number 1, you're not alone, and hopefully you're over the worst of it. Generally, it's the first week after surgery that is definitely the worst. Certainly was for me with my hysterectomy and me with my gallbladder. But man, recovery takes time. And the big thing about hysterectomy that you've got to understand is that you've got stitches in there that are basically holding your viscera together that will be there for 90 days, 3 months. They won't dissolve for 3 months. They're literally holding you together. And so those post-operative suggestions about not lifting anything are critical to your recovery. 6 weeks post-surgery, I bent down and picked up a t-shirt or a couple of t-shirts. Super light, right? Bent down, picked it up, ruptured a stitch, gush of blood. So, and of course, when I went back to the doctor, he could see the broken stitch. So, you're recovering from surgery. Did it make your IC worse? Probably not. Did it tweak your pelvic floor? Yes. The pain after a hysterectomy causes your pelvic floor muscles to get very tight. Sometimes your pelvic floor muscle spasm. Mine spasmed for about 10 months after my surgery. And they had to send me to physical therapy to get it to stop spasming. Normally, Perla, what they do after a hysterectomy is they do a hydrodistension because they want to look inside the bladder just to make sure they didn't actually hurt the bladder in any way. Did they cut the bladder accidentally, or did they get a stitch through the bladder wall? So, Perla, did they do a hydrodistension at the very end of your hysterectomy to make sure your bladder was okay? Hello, Peggy. Happy Easter to you too. Carolyn says, do you know if there are any clinical trials being done in Canada? Well, we can look it up right now. Hold on. Let me look it up. The way we can look up a clinical trial is go to clinicaltrials.gov. And I'm going to put in on my search interstitial cystitis, and I'm going to put for location Canada. And let's see what comes up. Search by address, city, state, or, oh, I have to select it from the drop-down list. I might be on the wrong. Okay, are you going to take Canada? Clinicaltrials.gov. Okay, there we go. Let's do recruiting or not yet recruiting studies, and let's see what we've got. There is one clinical trial for IC happening in Canada right now. It is a Botox study. It is being done by Allergan. So this study of Botox injections to assess the change in disease activity and adverse events in adult women with IC-BPS. Guys, please understand, yes, there are going to be studies for women. Yes, there are going to be studies for men. Yes, then the best studies are the studies that include both. So let us see. Looks like most of it's being done in Alabama. They're not giving the Canadian location. Oh, wait, yes, they are. Hold on. Hold on. Yes, they are. So this study is in Alabama, in California, lots of research centers in California, Connecticut, District of Columbia, Florida, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Nevada, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee. Wow, that's a big study. Texas, Virginia. And in Canada, it is being done in Kingston, Ontario at Queen's University. It's being done in Toronto, Ontario at Sunnybrook Health Sciences. And it is being done in Quebec at Sherbrooke. CHUS Hospital Florimont. I don't have a good French accent. Okie dokie artichoke. So that's exciting. Now we've got some good study happening up in Canada. Val, thank you so much for the 50 stars. Much appreciated. Hello, Sue. Happy Easter to you. Peggy, I promise I won't overdo it. I'm being very smart about this one, let me tell you. Val says, my symptoms look like they're from the pudendal nerve, but I'm so sensitive to food. Why? Well, so remember in our phenotyping, we focus on kind of 5 core variants. We focus on Hunner's lesions, bladder wall driven, pelvic floor driven, pudendal neuralgia, and widespread pain, central nervous system. And so anytime you have pudendal neuralgia, you have tight muscles. Unless you're born with a birth defect where the nerve is passing where it's not supposed to go. The vast majority of time, a patient has positional symptoms, pain that shoots down their leg, et cetera, et cetera. That's because a muscle is so tight, it's squeezing a nerve. The problem with tight muscles is they also squeeze blood vessels. And if your bladder is supposed to get 24 units of blood a day, but it's only getting 10 because your muscles are so tight, they're restricting blood flow to the bladder. Are you going to have a healthy bladder wall? And the answer, of course, is no. Your bladder needs full oxygenation. It needs full nutrition. And if the pelvic floor muscles are so terribly tight, that leaves a devastating toll on the tissues that need that blood supply that are not getting the blood supply. So patients with pelvic floor dysfunction will be diet sensitive at first, but once those muscles are released and blood flow it improves, ischemia is reversed, the bladder wall heals. And generally, food sensitivity goes away when the bladder wall heals. I mean, my God, this is the big thing we all have to understand now. And that is that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, everybody went, IC is an incurable bladder disease. That changed in 2011 or 2008, one of those 2 years, when the first large study of physical therapy was, the results were released, which proved the pelvic floor physical therapy was stunningly effective and more effective than virtually any other treatment ever studied at reducing the symptoms of IC. And when that study came out, this was a national study, and I think it was also up in Canada, everybody went, uh-oh, wait a second. Pelvic floor therapy outperforms most bladder treatments? How is that even possible for a bladder disease? Well, maybe it's actually not a bladder disease in most of those patients. Maybe it's a neuromuscular disorder. And that, in fact, is what our revised national guidelines that were released last year say, is that there's no bladder disease found in the vast majority of IC patients. IC is instead considered a neuromuscular pain syndrome for which muscles and nerves are the underlying problem as compared to a problem with the bladder wall. But it gets tricky because tight muscles give you all the symptoms of a bladder infection. So every single one of us assumed when this started that we had UTIs. But our cultures were negative. So then we were told that it was an incurable bladder disease. And we're like, okay, well, I got a diagnosis, thank God, but this totally sucks. I don't want an incurable disease for the rest of my life. So they give us the diet, they give us the bladder meds, say, see you in 6 months, and we want to get better. We do everything. We follow the diet. We take the various meds, the antidepressants, the antihistamines, the Elmerons. But the problem is that for most of those patients, you still flare. Why? Because bladder treatments will not fix tight muscles. And this is exactly why we phenotype now. Every patient needs to be phenotyped at their very first appointment so that you don't waste 30 years like I wasted 30 years doing freaking bladder treatments that had no chance of helping me. Why am I symptom free now? Because we found my underlying problem. My underlying problem was tight pelvic floor muscles on the left side from an old broken tailbone. My bladder symptoms started in 7th grade, the same year I broke my tailbone. And I have a SI dysfunction on that side. In fact, I had to reset my SI joint this morning. If I sit the wrong way, I lay the wrong way, my SI joint, your SI joint's supposed to be like this. Sometimes it goes, whoops. And let me tell you, when it's like this, it does not feel good. Then you have to lay on you have to lay on a couch and let that side, the way I do it is I lay face down on my couch and I hang the bad side off of the edge of the couch. And I hang there for about 30 seconds and just let the gravity pull the bone back down so that it's straight again, like this. And thank God it worked because it hurt. Okay, so that's why you're sensitive to food. You're sensitive to food because tight pelvic floor muscles are affecting the health of the bladder wall. And if we want the bladder to heal, we got to restore circulation, and we do that with pelvic floor physical therapy. Catherine said, is this a private or public page? This is a public page. This meeting is recorded. Cara says, hi, Jill. It's good to see you. Nice to see you too, honey. And thank you so much for the stars. Sue says, oats serve for horses and cows. They can handle these straw, so it makes sense that it wouldn't be that good for humans. Yeah, or hay. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm one of those people, I cannot eat oats at all. Oats trigger terrible bowel issues for me. Terrible spasming. Lisa said that explains so much. Good. I'm glad. Sue says, do you think there's any connection to eating a low acid diet and getting gallstones? I've heard of other patients having their problems with their gallbladder. No, it's not the low acid diet. It's the diet high in cream and milk. It's fats. Eating high fatty foods is what contributes to the development of gallstones, along with cholesterol. And like, I thought I was doing so well. I mean, over the last 6 months, I had lost a good 15 pounds. I was not eating red meat. I was only eating chicken. I was eating a ton of veggies, stir fries, tofu, stuff like that. But I was also doing a lot of coconut milk, yogurt, and coconut milk smoothies, and Kind bars. Almond coconut Kind bars for my snack every afternoon. And I'm thoroughly convinced that that's why my gallbladder had its last dance, so to speak. It declared war. But remember, I grew up Norwegian and Swedish. We grew up on cream and butter. And my gallstones were enormous. I mean, they had to cut an incision like this big at the top of my belly to get them out of my belly. And it's crazy that my ducts were completely and totally blocked. Completely blocked. I had no idea. So now I'm going a low saturated fat diet, but I'm eating more carbs. And I don't like eating the carbs. I like being slim, but it is what it is. My body will find its new normal. I'm actually kind of happy not to be at the family Easter gathering up at my sister's house. I mean, I can't drive that far. There's just no way I could. My incisions would take it. But trying to eat a low fat, low salt diet, IC friendly diet is always. Well, I don't have to worry about IC friendly anymore. I can eat pretty much anything, and it doesn't irritate my bladder at all. But going low salt and low saturated fat's been challenging. Lizzie, getting back to Lizzie, she said she has had a pelvic floor therapist. She really didn't help. She said it was stress, so I do a lot of breathing. She did say it was pretty good tight, so no kegels. I do stretch. The pain in my back is always on my period, then it's gone. Well, again, Lizzie, there is a legacy to tight muscles. When you're under stress, when you're in fight or flight, what happens? Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, and your muscles get tight to prepare you to fight or flee for your life. So being under stress for long periods of time results in pretty tight pelvic floor muscles. So she's right in the sense that we have to work on that stress level. We've got to reduce that stress and what it does throughout our body. But at the same time, don't give up on the pelvic floor physical therapy. You have to ask that physical therapist, are my muscles responding to therapy, or are they always locking back down into tension? If your muscles are always locking back down into tension, we got to figure out why. Is it because you have a bad hip, a bad SI joint like I do, a broken tailbone, a tailbone that's out of position, a bad knee? Do you limp when you walk? Or, as Dr. Weiss found in his career, the vast majority of patients who struggle with long-term pelvic floor dysfunction, it relates to how their foot hits the ground when they walk. All the stresses and pressures from from you walking are directed back up into your pelvic cavity. And if you've got one leg that's longer than the other, then you got a pelvis that's tilted. If you have one ankle that rolls in, rolls it out, that messes with your pelvis. All sorts of things mess with your pelvis. So, Lizzie, that's the single most important question you've got to ask that pelvic floor physical therapist. Or did my muscles slowly respond over time and get better? Or did they always get tight? If they always got tight, we got to figure out why they're getting tight. And it's that internal massage that is far more effective than stretching. And most patients, myself included, have a wand that we can use internally when we start feeling those muscles getting tight. Takes me about 2 to 3 minutes to massage that muscle to get it to relax and release and drop back down into position. So hopefully your physical therapist has encouraged you to get a wand and to use it. And let me demo that for you. Hold on a sec. Here we go. Here's a wand. Ow. Ow. What? And sorry, guys, not dressed up today. We're super cash. Super casual. Hence my pink pants. Okay. Let me show you what a wand will do. So this is my favorite wand. Where's my demo? That's so weird. Where's my demo? Huh. Okay. Well, this sucks. Where's my demo? Okay. I hate to take it out of the plastic. I don't really want to take this one out of the plastic, but you can see it's a glass wand. You know what? Hold on a second. This is ridiculous. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Okay. Okay. And you know what? I'm a little hot. Give me a moment. Give me a quick moment. I got to take out this sweatshirt. All right, you guys, you know what? Let's take a 30-second bathroom break too. And then I'm going to come back and demonstrate the one for you, okay? Be right back because I got to go to the bathroom. All righty then. Hey, you know what? It's warming up. I think we're all ready. Oh, here, hold on a second. Burn it. I don't know about you, but I do not like cold weather. I like warm weather. I like warm weather. And it's been cold for months now. I'm ready for warmth. Okay, here are my glasses. And let's go ahead and talk about this wand. All right. You can get this wand right now from desertharvest.com. They bought the company that makes this wand. So we don't have it in our shop anymore, but you can get it at Desert Harvest. It's a glass wand. Now, here's your pelvis. And you can see that the pelvic muscles are low. So this is from the bottom, but you can see that they basically sit on top of bone. So you're really not going to be able to reach most of these muscles externally. The best way to reach these muscles is with a finger, bam, up inside your vagina, or for men in the rectum. And so you can see now, just with a finger, when a physical therapist is working on you, they're basically just going to follow the muscle line. They're looking for tender points, trigger points. They might stop and rub on them. Sometimes they strum across the muscle. Sometimes I do that with my muscle. So when that physical therapist is working with you, that's basically what they're doing. They're touching muscle groups and they're trying to get that muscle to relax and release. What happens when these muscles get tight is they actually lift out of position. They lift up into the pelvic cavity where they really start to interfere with things. We need to get these muscles to drop back down into position. And that's why massaging them is so incredibly important. So that's what the physical therapist is doing. But of course, you can't reach that far unless you have very, very, very long arms. And so we would normally use a wand at home to go in and basically do what the physical therapist does. You can see that with a wand, I can reach these muscles. I can do what I need to do to get to these muscles. And again, for me, so for me now, because I know what to look for, and as I've done it a lot, so I now know what a good muscle feels like. A good muscle feels like a raw chicken breast. It's soft, but it has substance to it. It has substance to it. A tight muscle feels like painful beef jerky. And so when I do my internal work, I basically lay on my bed, I put my feet up on the wall, and I'm always going to start on one side. You don't do both sides together. And you can see here, see your tailbone? A good way to visualize this is that your tailbone is basically the center of your pelvis. And you got muscles that go from each side, they go up and around. See that? So when I start again, I'm laying on my back, feet up on the wall, and I'm going to start on one side, and I'm basically just going to touch the muscles and see how they feel. If they don't hurt and they're soft and pliable, I'm good. Then I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to work on that other side. And generally for me, it's my left side where I'm going to find beef jerky, where I'm going to find discomfort. And once I find that discomfort, I'm just going to be very persistent for a minute or two. And I'm just going to rub with my wand along the length of that muscle. And, um, and sometimes, I mean, you have to learn the right pressure for you. And I just got to be really honest. When you first start doing it, you're not going to know what to do. I didn't know what to do. First time I tried a wand, I'm like, okay, I put it in there. What do I do now? Like, I didn't know what I was doing. So I go back to the physical therapist and say, okay, help me. I don't know what to do. And she goes, Jill, it's a J shape. Just move it in a J shape. And I'm like, huh? A J, a capital J? Like this? I come back home, get the wand. J shape made no sense to me. No sense at all to me. I call her back. I'm sorry. I do not understand what you want me to do with this wand. This makes no sense to me. And it was this book that finally taught me the J shape, which I'm going to now teach you. So again, think of two capital J's facing each other. Your tailbone is the center at the tip of the J. And you'll see you're going to curve around and up, just like a J curves around and up. And then here's the other J, around and up, around and up. The goal here really is to help you be independent so that if you flare, you don't have to wait a month to go into the physical therapist. We don't want you to be in pain for a month because your muscles got jacked up in some way. The goal here is to give you the tools you need so that when you start to feel your muscles get tight again, you have a wand, you can get in there, do what you need to do, 5 minutes, one and done, and the flare's over. Because pelvic floor flares can be over fairly quickly if we can massage that muscle back down and get it out of tension. So again, I woke up this morning, it started yesterday morning, 2 nights ago. I slept the wrong way and I slightly dislocated my SI joint. So my SI joint was like this. And believe me, it hurts a lot. And I had a lot of pain in my left glute when I was walking, that's how I know. And so what did I do this morning? The first thing I had to do is I had to get that bone back together in the right position, which thankfully some physical therapists taught me how to do, and you can learn about that on the internet. So I did get the joint in the correct position. But I'm going to have to do my wand tonight, maybe even this afternoon after I'm done with this meeting, just to make sure that I've got it all calmed down. See, like they were just there. It just got me again. Now, what did I do? See? Darn it. Did I just do it again? Because all my surgical pain's on my right side, but that's like right. Oh, see, darn it. I just dislocated it again. I could tell. I will fix it. I'm fine right now. I will fix it. It's not a problem. That's life in the aging athlete. All right, let's go back to your questions here. Cindy said, I use estradiol every other night. I'm up to every 2 hours to catheterize. Means I'm washing myself a lot. Is it safe to use a small amount every time because I wash it off so often? I don't know, hun. I don't know what the rate of absorption of estradiol is. That's a really, really good question for your pharmacist, okay? Rhonda said, Jill, I eat good fats, coconut whip in my pantry. I rely on coconut milk and almond milk. I also eat almond butter. I must say too much of the almond butter, but I eat mostly vegetables. Girls, that's exactly what I was doing. But you had your gallbladder out after I healed. You stopped all dairy and went on the good fats. I do great with these fats after my surgery. Rhonda, when did you have your surgery? How long did it take before you could go back and tolerate that? Because I would like to be able to go back to my coconut milk yogurt, which I love. But right now, they told me I had to be low, very, very low fat for 2 months. All right, Peggy says, and you guys, please bear with me. Facebook jumps all over the place. If I missed your question, don't take it personally. I'm not ignoring you. Just ask the question again, okay? Lizzie says, it still feels like someone's just kicking me in the crotch. I feel like I want to squeeze down there and push on that whole area almost to the bone. And food for sure, certain foods make it flare. Okay, but honey, that squeezing, that pushing, that's all pelvic floor. So when you went to physical therapy for the first time, tell us what they found. Tell us what they found. And did they do internal massage work? Because it doesn't sound like they did. Hey, John, what is the best kind of doctor who can diagnose structural issues in our pelvis? An orthopedic surgeon or a physiatrist or physiatrist? Marcia says, if urine cultures come back leukocytes slightly elevated, meaning inflammation, can pelvic tightness cause this bladder inflammation? Marcia, that's a fantastic question. Um, hmm. If your muscles are very, 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 very tight, you're not going to have a sound bladder wall, which means your bladder will be very, very easily irritated by urine, which would then account for the inflammation. Gay says, what causes vaginal dryness? Gay, estrogen atrophy. That's what causes it. You're either on birth control, you're on Lupron for endometriosis, or you're just getting older. Just normal. It's a normal part of aging. Basically, our ovaries stop producing estrogen as we get older and older. And every woman goes through it. It's not a disease. There's nothing wrong with you other than you're just getting older or you're on a medication which suppresses estrogen. Anne says, can you phenotype me? I have urgency, frequency, burning when flaring, and cotidynia. I'm 67. Okay, so Anne, we can try that. But Anne, here, the question that I always ask every patient is, how old are you now? Well, you're 67 now. How old were you when your symptoms began? And is there any event that you associate with the onset of your symptoms? So, how old were you when your symptoms began? And is there any event that you associate with the onset of your symptoms? Had you been traveling? Did you have a fall? Were you in a car accident? Anything funky there? Marcia says most IC patients have elevated leukocytes. I thought it was common. It is common, but it's not common to have dark purple leukocytes. When I say that, what I mean is on the dipstick test, like the azo dipstick test for UTI, it tests for leukocytes and nitrites. And many IC patients who have a food flare will have elevated leukocytes, but no nitrite. And that's just because the bladder wall has been irritated by the food, and the bladder wall sends the army there. The army is, in fact, leukocytes, and that's why we tend to have more leukocytes during flares. But if you have the double positive nitrites and leukocytes, then it's a very clear indication that you've got an active infection going on. Okay, Anne, how old were you when your symptoms started? You're 67 now, but when did they start? Last year, 10 years ago, 30 years ago? When did your symptoms start? Sarah says she'd love to hear about Botox. Okay, so I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Botox. Botulinum toxin. Most people are associated Botox with stopping wrinkles, right? They would inject it into the forehead. Obviously, I have not done that because I can move my eyebrows, right? You always know that somebody's done Botox cosmetically because they can't move their eyebrows. So what does Botox do? Botox basically silences the nerve for a period of time. And then it wears off and the nerve comes back. And then all of a sudden they're frowning and they start seeing wrinkles and they go get another Botox injection on their forehead. Botox has also been used consistently for a number of medical conditions, usually medical conditions that involve very, very tight muscles. So if you have uh, TMJ really badly, like I do, and sometimes they will use Botox to get these muscles to release for a period of time. If you have migraines that are associated with tight muscles, they might use Botox to get those muscles to release. Botox has also been used in the bladder wall, and In their old system, it was a step 5 treatment option. The reason why it was step 5 rather than step 1 or 2 is because it is associated with a lot of adverse events, the most important being urinary retention. So when they do Botox in the bladder wall, they pick a portion of the wall and then they just kind of inject it. But you can't see the nerves. So it's kind of based upon the experience of the physician on where the nerves normally flow, combined with a good amount of luck. Well, sometimes when they do Botox in the bladder wall, they accidentally silence the nerve that controls your ability to pee. So after Botox treatment, you simply can't do it. This is why this is a very well known risk of Botox in the bladder wall. And these patients will need to self catheterize for a good chunk of time, several weeks, maybe a couple of months, before the Botox wears off, unsilences those nerves, and allows that patient to urinate again. So, Botox ultimately is not a what I call a constructive therapy. It is a destructive therapy. It is effective because I don't think we can say it damages, but it basically silences the nerve. But the nerve always comes back. So if you're in the Botox pipeline, you're just going to have treatment after treatment after treatment. And it really doesn't fix anything. It's all about symptom management. Now, Botox can also be used in trigger points in the pelvic floor muscles, and that's where I'm the risk is less because it cannot when you're injecting it into the pelvic floor, it's not going to silence your ability to pee, and it has the ability to kind of help that super 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 tight muscle relax. I would caution you though. The thing about the pelvic floor and about muscles in general is muscles respond beautifully to hands-on work. I did surgery when I got my pharmacology. I have a really rare medical degree. It's a drug development degree called pharmacology. It's not pharmacy, it's pharmacology. The people with that degree develop medication. And part of that degree was doing surgery. I did surgery for a year on animals. And of course, the reason why I didn't pursue that after that is because I love animals and I couldn't tolerate the animal research. And I'm very proud that I never lost an animal or never, I mean, I love animals. Wrong career choice for me at pharmacology, that's for sure. Anyway, one of the most important lessons I learned in my surgical lab is that muscles respond beautifully to physical manipulation. So I could make an incision in a muscle that was an inch long, and I could, through gentle stretching, probing, I could stretch that out to 3 inches without breaking anything. And then you could watch it go right back. And so muscles are wonderfully adaptive and responsive to physical manipulation. Some patients just don't want a finger in their vagina or their rectum. And that's really tragic because we have to work with the muscle to get the muscle healthy again. Botox will never repair the muscle completely. It will temporarily fix it, but it will come back. And you're not going to get that muscle health back where it needs to be until we get fingers on that muscle, stretching it out, following the groove of the grain of the muscle, for lack of a better term, finding those trigger points that are tight, massaging those trigger points out. That's how we get muscles healthy. So I personally am not a fan of doing therapies like Botox when I know from my own work with muscles and with my own muscles that Once you get comfortable with it, it's remarkably effective. It's remarkably effective. Okay, so let's go and hold on one sec. Let me just go with what Sue just wrote here. Sue says, I've done Botox 5 times, twice a year, and my muscles, I can tell you what my experiences are if you want to message me later. That's great, Sue. And Sue also has an outstanding doctor. She says, I would not trust any doctor, just any doctor, and I've not had any serious issues. But she says, my goal is to get off of Botox by doing physical therapy, and I'm stretching them further out as they are lasting longer with more therapy. Exactly. It's all about reversing muscle memory. That for some reason, in of- in many cases, something that happened in childhood or teenage years, some sort of trauma to the pelvic floor. Like, I'll never forget the patient that I was working with who was trying to vault over a fire hydrant, and she landed on top of the fire hydrant, and that metal thing at the top of the fire hydrant went right up where it shouldn't have gone. She was bleeding profusely after that. She suffered a severe muscle injury. And so that never really got treated, and her muscles just locked down tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. So that's really classic in our office when we start working with those patients who have very tight pelvic floor muscles. You see a history of athletics in childhood, or you see a history of trauma in child, or sadly, you see a history of sexual abuse in childhood. Those are heartbreaking cases, and I think every single one of us have to remind ourselves and each other that this is not your fault. You have done nothing wrong. You were hurt. So again, for that young child who's sexually abused, I mean, think about what's happening for that child. And again, I was working with a woman who was sexually abused for about 10 years by a stepfather. Her muscles were locked down tight as a drum by the time she got into her 20s. She had never had comfortable sex. She didn't believe she would ever have sex. She would not have vaginal exams because her muscles were in terrible, terrible shape from that abuse. And that's muscle memory. Those muscles get stuck tight. But the beautiful thing about muscles is when you work with them, they will relax. They will relax. And we can get them to adopt new correct muscle memory. Okay? So we're going from tension to relaxation. All right, let's go back to David. Hold that question real quick. Marcia, yes. Marcia said, so elevated leukocytes is proof the bladder is inflamed and not necessarily from tight pelvic floor muscle. Absolutely. Okay, so we're going back to Anne here. Anne's symptoms started when she was 64 years old. Okay, so when we think about our phenotypes, I use the pain system, which focuses on 5 phenotypes. So the first one is Hunner's lesions, visible wounds on the bladder wall. So Anne, has anybody looked in your bladder and or told you that you have Hunner's lesions? All right. All right. So while we're waiting for Anne to answer that question, Anne, has anybody ever told you that you have Hunner's lesions? Let's go to David here. And actually, all right, David, where did it go? Here it is. David says, I'm going for a hydrodistension. They will inject steroids, okay, and use the other meds they usually put in. Is this procedure still okay for Hunner's ulcers? Yeah, sure. But I don't know if you were here when I started off the meeting, but we have another new research study, which is the was testing the use of an antiviral for patients with active viral infections, and the results were very, very good. So we've got more research going in that direction. But in the meantime, according to our AUA guidelines, the correct way to treat a Hunner's lesion is by injecting it with a steroid to calm the inflammation, which is what they're going to do. And that's perfectly reasonable. The advantage of injecting steroids into a lesion is it doesn't leave scar tissue. Whereas if you cauterize the lesion, that can leave some scar tissue where you cauterized it. David said, sometimes after I pee, it burns in my bladder. The doctor said that isn't a pelvic floor issue. Hope you're feeling better. I'm going to disagree with him. I mean, when we think about the classic symptom of the bladder wall, pain is the bladder fills with urine that is relieved by urination. You feel better after your urination, points directly to the bladder wall as a source of that pain. Pain after urination, we associate more with pelvic floor muscle. But of course, we're all different. We're all different. We're all wired a little bit differently. That may be the case for some patients and not for others. Sue said, okay, so Sue said here, I was misdiagnosed for 30 years with Hunner's lesions, which are really just high flow hydrodistensions. But I had multiple injuries from horseback riding and a torn hip that was unidentified. And let's see here, hold on. That was okay. Sorry, hon, I think you're using your voice recognition. It's not flowing well. I think what Sue is saying is they told her she had Hunner's lesions for 30 years, but in actuality, what they eventually found was that she had almost a catastrophic injury from horseback riding. Sue was a competitive horseback rider. I think she did barrel racing. And when she actually got to an expert, what they found, so what made Sue so interesting, and Sue, please correct me if I'm wrong here, is that when the pelvic floor work came out, you were able to go to physical therapy. But what made you unique is that there was always one spot on one side that hurt. And I always say, if your pain is always in exactly the same location, especially if it's to the left or right of center, then we have to try to understand what's at that location to the left or right of center, to the left or right of center. And what they found with Sue was that she had a mass of scar tissue woven through one side of her pelvic floor. A really rare injury. And Sue, again, if I remember correctly, when the doctor said, wow, look at that, that's scar tissue, you said, I know exactly when that happened because you had a really bad fall off of your horse and you landed on that spot. And so that was your injury that began all of this for you. You are living proof that this was never your fault. You are living proof that IC can be caused by neuromuscular injury. And so here's what Sue said. The one side on the one spot started after my hysterectomy when my doctor tore my hip and then pretended he didn't. But I always had painful bladder syndrome so severely I spent many years curled up in a ball and severe food sensitivity. Yeah, but you had that, didn't you have that horse injury? That's you. I'm sure that was you. I remember talking to you about that. Okay, so Anne had no Hunner's lesions. Okay, so Anne, so we're trying to phenotype Anne. So Anne, we're going to go to our next phenotype. Our next phenotype is bladder wall driven. So in the bladder wall driven phenotype, the very first thing we're going to consider is chemical injury. The bladder, like any other part of the body, can be injured. And generally, it's injured through toxic chemical exposure. So if you've gone through chemotherapy, the chemicals of the chemotherapy are going to damage your bladder wall and give you symptoms. Or if you drink way too much diet soda, got to remember NutraSweet is broken down into formic acid and formaldehyde. Those are going to irritate your bladder, no doubt about it. So if you're a chemical injury patient, what we have to do is we got to find the chemical irritant, get rid of the chemical irritant, give your bladder time to heal. It'll heal in a couple of months, usually. The second thing we're going to look for in the bladder wall driven subtype is estrogen atrophy, the quality and health of your skin. And at the age of 64, when your symptoms began, you were in total estrogen atrophy. You were in estrogen atrophy once your period stopped. Even before your period stopped, your estrogen levels were dropping. So anytime symptoms begin at your age, we're always first going to consider the quality and health of your skin and your estrogen levels. And so, is that your phenotype? That is absolutely one of your phenotypes because you're at the age where it happens. Happens to every woman. I'm there too. But you also said that you had coccydynia, which is tailbone. So now we want to go to phenotype number 3, pelvic floor driven. Did you have a pelvic floor injury? Why do you have coccydynia? Do you know? Was there a trauma, car accident, fall? You must have fallen on your tailbone or something. So tell us about that coccydynia. Okay, getting back to Sue. Yes, I had so many horse injuries, I can't count, but it was the one-sided thing that happened after my hysterectomy. Okay. I also have a massive scar tissue right next to my pudendal nerve that they found during a scan, which they did before you tried InterStim. My pelvic floor, an anatomical mess from injuries, and now everything is just finally calming down with the right diagnosis, but I have a long way of going. Okay, Anne says you just got coccydynia, no injury. Well, coccydynia normally takes some sort of trauma. It could be that you were sitting in a desk job for a long period of time. Something irritated your tailbone. Your rectal doctor diagnosed it. Oh, spin bike. There you go. That's it. It's a spin bike. So I have a great picture. So we call that bike rider syndrome. Okay. Here it is. Cyclist syndrome. So here is the bicycle seat that's pushing up into your tender bits. And if you can see closely, it's pushing directly on the clitoral penile branch in the clitoral penile canal under the pubic arch. That's what it says right there. And the perineal rectal branches in the Alcock's canal within the sit bone. So in other words, when you sit on that spin bike, you're pushing directly up into muscles and nerves. And that, my friend, is your trauma and why you have coccydynia. We call it cyclist syndrome. So let me see. You know, one of the things that I wanted to do today. Okay, so let me just read you the section on tailbone pain out of my favorite book, Breaking Through Chronic Pelvic Pain, which is available in the IC Network shop, $6 cheaper than Amazon. This is the best book you will ever read for anybody with neuromuscular issues. This is fantastic. And it's filled with success stories. So I'm just going to read these 2 pages. Actually, a little bit more. Because most of us are accustomed to referring to the coccyx as our tailbone. I use this informal designation with my patients. However, it is important to be aware the medical terminology as well. The word cotidinia, more recently spelled, okay, it's a broad categorical designation for tailbone pain, acute or chronic, of any origin. Here, my comment, okay, so hold on. Though falls are an obvious acute pain source, most physicians fail to understand the long-term implications of muscle and nerve dysfunction, these traumatic incidents generate. Therefore, when taking a patient's history, they generally neglect to inquire about falls that occur in years past. Patients with pelvic floor problems, in an attempt to keep off their painful bottoms, sit slumped on their tailbones. This posture causes trigger points to form in the iliococcygeus and coccygeus muscles, adding insult to injury. Okay, so tailbone pain in the absence of past or recent injury is also a common complaint with pelvic floor muscle dysfunction for several reasons. The first is that the dysfunctional muscles burdened with trigger points connect to the tailbone where they refer pain. So again, there's your tailbone. Look at all the muscles that attach to the tailbone. So what he's saying is if one of these muscles is messed up, that's going to refer pain and a trigger pain associated with the tailbone. The second is that patients with pelvic floor problems sit slumped on their tailbones in an attempt to keep off their painful bottoms. The slump posture creates trigger points in these muscles. These muscles then engage the pudendal nerve, further complicating and exacerbating the problem. Here it is worthy of note that in the 1937 report cited earlier in this chapter, Dr. Thiel stressed the relationship between sitting in a slump position, pelvic floor muscle disturbance, and tailbone pain. Eastern traditions, okay, as I mentioned in chapter 3, Eastern traditions also emphasize, hold on. I don't need to read that part. Don't need to read that part. Okay. So here's a story. Now that we've introduced all the players, let's give them the stage and watch them work their mischief. This is Scott's story. Scott was 24 years old when he came to see me. He had been suffering for 11 months with rectal, perineal, penile, and scrotal burning, was finding it difficult to initiate urination. He couldn't pee on command. About 1 month prior to the onset of symptoms, he became stressed and depressed because of a serious illness in the family. He then began to increase his alcohol consumption and developed intermittent diarrhea. Several red flags surfaced as his earlier history unfolded, including numerous injuries and falls during athletic activities, low back pain beginning around the age of 13, and periodic problems with his left hip that required adjustments when his hip went out of place. During my external examination, I found a curvature of the lumbar spine and trigger points in most of the muscles that surround the pelvis. My internal findings were particularly striking. They were active and exquisitely tender trigger points around the urinary sphincter, the urogenital diaphragm, the obturator, piriformis, and puborectalis muscles. In addition, there was marked sensitivity of both pudendal nerves. After performing myofascial release at the time of Scott's first visit, the pelvic muscle trigger points were only mildly tender or not tender at all, and the pudendal nerve sensitivity had disappeared. The fact that the nerves calmed down when the trigger point tenderness decreased indicates that the distressed muscles had been compromising the nerves. Thus, the muscles were the primary cause of his cotidinia. So how do we put this info together? The first requirement for effective treatment is that we understand why the muscle trigger points form. This knowledge helps us identify the underlying problem, which in turn helps to prevent symptom persistence, yada, yada. In Scott's case, there were many events that might have contributed to overloading the pelvic floor and the perineal muscles. I find this with most patients who are suffering from chronic pelvic pain and dysfunction. A series of stressors create symptoms that ultimately push the affected stressors and the patient over the edge. We can look at each stressor or series of stressors as 1 ounce of tea poured into a 3-ounce cup. When you add the 4th ounce, the tea spills out and symptoms appear. So ounce number 1, over the years, this athletic young man sustained many injuries and falls that could stress the muscles of the pelvic floor, perineum, urogenital diaphragm, creating trigger points. Number 2, the curvature of Scott's lumbar lumbar spine could create uneven tension upon an overload of many of the muscles that were burdened with trigger points. Number 3, he had left hip pain that required periodic adjustments. The external hip rotators pass into the pelvis, and if they're tight and dysfunctional, they can disturb and tighten the neighboring muscles and nerves. And number 4, severe emotional stress can have a devastating effect on muscles in general. In Scott's case, stress is what appears to have sent the pelvic muscle team into a tailspin. At that point, latent trigger points that had produced no symptoms for years became active, and they were painful and cried out for attention. There's many patient stories in here. You can get that book right on the IT Network shop, as I right now have pain in my left hip. So annoying. I need to go lay on my couch again, but I'm not going to do it until afterwards. Kayleen says, "Oh, Jill, you have to talk about this next week. I have to get back to family. I'm really curious about this." Okay. John, thank you so much for the 200 stars. Really appreciate it. Sharon says, "I have found tailbone pain can be IBS." Absolutely, but it's also, I know for me now, as a former IBS patient, I had severe IBS in my 20s. I don't have that anymore. Whenever I start to have rectal pain, it's always coming from my muscles. Always coming from my muscles. Always. And how do I know that? I actually, anytime I start to have rectal pain, I just slide my my hand down my butt cheek, and I go towards my rectum, but I'm not touching my rectum. I'm basically, what I'm doing is, through my skin, I'm touching this muscle and this muscle because I want to see if they're tender. And again, the vast majority of time I have rectal pain, I find that these muscles are very tight, and usually it's from sitting too long. I've just been sitting too long, which is why walking and getting up and out of this chair is just so incredibly important. You know, they call sitting the new smoking. We're learning the toll now that sitting for long periods of time can take on our body. Our bodies are designed to move. We need to be moving every day. So getting out and walking every day, so incredibly important to your physical and your emotional health. It's just be out in nature, calm everything down. Okay. Did I miss some questions here? Lizzie said, "The pelvic therapist said to do behavior training. I don't have anyone else near me, so I just gave up. I get what she's saying, but she didn't do the massage thing." So, Lizzie, there's a fantastic website, pelvicrehab.com. That's short for rehabilitation. pelvicrehab.com. That is a database of the 10,000 or so physical therapists who have gotten the proper training. Because the best way to work with the pelvic floor is with hands-on internal massage. You've never had that done, and that's what works. So go to pelvicrehab.com, put in your area code, and you can search for the physical therapist around you. There are some physical therapists who are what we call certified. They have taken all of the training, and they now have PRPC as initials after their degree and their name. So they'll be PT, DPT, which is a doctor of physical therapy, and then PRPC, which is their pelvic rehabilitation certification. So on the pelvicrehab.com website, they are characterized by yellow markers. And for anybody with a complex injury, you want to see somebody who's certified. The other physical therapists that are in the process of becoming certified, so they've taken some but not all of the classes, have a gray marker. So if you don't have somebody who's certified within an hour drive, but you do have somebody who's just down the street, go ahead and start with the person down the street who's had some training. If you go to a physical therapist and they do not do internal work, or they don't even do an internal examination, they're not trained unless there's a really good reason not to do an internal examination, like your muscles are so freaking tight they can't get their finger in there in the first place. Or if you happen to be a victim of sexual abuse and you don't want anybody touching you down there, that's also very, very understandable. And if that's the case, number one, I just want to say I'm so incredibly sorry that you were abused. You were a victim. Shouldn't have happened to anybody, and it shouldn't have happened to you. And so I completely understand why your crotch is off limits. It's important that you tell the physical therapist that you have a history of sexual abuse, because ultimately it's about building trust. They will work with you externally for a significant period of time to prove to you that number one, you can trust them, that they will be safe and respect your body. And number two, to show you that as we work with these muscles, the muscles begin to improve and heal. And hopefully, you will get to a point where you will allow them to do some internal work. Because unfortunately, if you have a problem with your piriformis muscle or some of these more awkward muscles, some of these muscles you just cannot reach externally. Some you can, some you can't. But it's ultimately getting a finger in here, or you learning how to do a wand so that you can do it yourself, where you will have full control. That's the way we want to approach it. When I work, ouch. See, darn it. That sometimes happens with my SI joint. If I don't, sometimes it will slide back out, and I've got to work it consistently to get it to behave. So, darn it. Okay. Well, anyway, I make it a point with every person that I work with when I do coaching, because I do coaching of patients almost every day. Um, I always reinforce that this is not your fault. You have done nothing wrong. Absolutely no shame or blame. I don't want anybody carrying any burden that they have contributed to their pelvic pain and their IC. Because, and especially for those of us who have been sexually abused or abused, um, and sadly, in my generation, the vast majority of girls that I were friends with, the great majority of us were raped. My tennis partner was gang raped. It's awful. I was rescued from a rapist when I was 19, when I was working in Connecticut. I don't even think they didn't even really understand what was happening, because I was in a date rape situation, and we were up on the upper floor, and he was forcing himself, and some of my fellow staff members came in, and he jumped up and ran out. And I don't think they even really realized what was going on. I'll never forget it. You know, I'll never forget it. When somebody forces you. So none of this is your fault. This is not my fault. And I carried tremendous shame and burden for decades. And it really wasn't until my mid 30s, and the new research that came out, a lot of the new research that came out, which really proved to me, I mean, God, my self esteem was in the toilet, literally. I didn't understand why I had all this pain. I didn't understand. I thought I was being punished. I thought I was a bad person. I remember very distinctly thinking that God must be punishing me for something that I did at some point in time. And I think I was like 25 or 26. And that's all gone now. All that shame is gone. I now know that it all goes back to me breaking my tailbone in seventh grade, causing a pretty significant pelvic injury combined with being a victim. And the blessing now of being an adult and the blessing that I try to reinforce to every patient that I work with who is also a victim is we're adults now. It'll never happen again. Most patient I most recently worked with who was abused for 10 years by her stepfather, I'm like, he's dead. It'll never happen again. And she's like, you're right, he is dead. And yet we remember that, we carry that. And that's why therapy and getting support and all that is just so incredibly important. It's in the past. It's over. It's done. I'm safe right now. You're safe right now. We have a roof over our heads. The abuser is gone. And what we have to focus on right now is what can we do today to feel better? We're not going to live in the past and we're not going to worry about the future. We're going to focus on the right now. What can I do right now to my body, my heart, my soul in a better position? And that's going to be doing your stretches, getting out in nature, working with your muscles, working with your body. It's going to be doing things that bring you peace, comfort, and joy, going out and sitting in the sun, going to church if you like to go to church, and all that sort of stuff. So don't get lost in the past and don't freak out about the future. This is the moment right now that you can do things that will make you feel better. I want you to ask yourself, what would that be? I made myself a carrot cake last night. First dessert I've made in a long time. I'm like, man, it's Easter. I made myself an olive oil carrot cake. I love filling up my home with the smell of baking. So do things that will make you feel good, but don't sabotage yourself by eating a lot of junk food and soda. That's not what I'm saying. Eat good, eat better. Thank you, Kim. Kim says, happy Easter, Jill. Glad you're feeling better. Thank you, honey. All right, so let's go back here. David, when I stand or walk, I feel discomfort. I feel like I have a weak bladder sphincter muscle. It's hard to explain. You know, David, male anatomy is very interesting. And I don't associate the bladder with body mechanics. At least for me, going from standing to sitting, sitting to standing, or walking didn't change my bladder function, but it did cause pain. So anytime moving your body causes pain, like walking or sitting to stand and standing to sitting, that's where we really have to look at body mechanics a little bit more. Let me ask you this. Hold on a sec. I'm having a memory here. Hold on a sec of something I read in this book that might be relevant to you. Hold on. Just hold on one momento here. I swear. Okay. Dude, I found it. How is that even possible? This is crazy. Okay. So he's talking about some work he did with Dr. Richard Schmidt and Dr. Emil Tanago at UC San Francisco. And he says this work shed considerable light on the dynamics of pelvic floor muscle dysfunction by demonstrating that symptoms were caused by tight, hyperirritable, unstable urinary sphincter muscles, not by the bladder. In 1981, Dr. Schmidt published a paper with Dr. Tanago on urethral syndrome with no sign of infection. They reported among their findings that in all cases, patients with this syndrome had increased discomfort and urge when the urethral sphincter pressure was high, as with a full bladder. Conversely, when the pressure dropped, as with urination, they experienced a corresponding decrease in both symptoms. Furthermore, they discovered that many patients experience relief from urgency only when relaxing the pelvic floor muscles to void. Their conclusion was that urethral syndrome was a muscle problem, not a bladder problem, and they cited relaxation of these muscles as a primary treatment. They concluded that the treatment should be aimed toward relaxing the tense, painful pelvic floor muscles. In 1991, Dr. Schmidt and Vapnek shed further light on pelvic floor muscle dysfunction with a study involving patients with IC. They found that IC patients exhibited the same increased tension and abnormalities in the behavior of their urinary sphincter and pelvic floor muscles that had previously documented in patients with severe urgency frequency syndrome. Their very significant conclusion was that the IC patients' urinary symptoms were more likely to reflect changes associated with these muscles rather than changes in the activity of the bladder itself. Hold on. Schmidt also explored the pain component of IC, noting that pressure applied to the pelvic floor muscles could cause pain or a flinch response, and that the assessment of these muscles was not generally included in the evaluation of IC patients. In their patients, upon the application of pressure, these tender muscles referred pain to the pubis, the suprapubic area, the area below the pubis, the perineum, the rectum, the tip of the penis, and the labia. Continued pressure resulted in activation of the autonomic nervous system with complaints of nausea and headache. So, one of the things that used to happen to me back when my IBS was really bad is that I would get really nauseous after I had a bowel movement. And that's what he said here. Continued pressure resulted in the activation of the autonomic nervous system with complaints of nausea and headache. Further, Schmidt discovered IC patients had no voluntary control over their pelvic floor muscles and therefore could not consciously relax them. They demonstrated that IC symptoms could quickly improve if these muscles were relaxed using biofeedback or nerve stimulation. All of their muscle findings were compatible with the presence of myofascial trigger points that refer pain to other areas, weaken the muscles, and create symptoms in the autonomic nervous system. And of course, for me, we know my fundamental problem was that original muscle injury that caused all this. So, David, Breaking Through Chronic Pelvic Pain, I think you have the book, page 254 and 255. So, what did your pelvic floor assessment find? Yolanda says, a few years back when I was put on antibiotics before they knew it was IC, the bladder frequency and urgency calmed completely down. So does this mean it's something in the bladder the antibiotic was addressing? Getting off the antibiotic, urgency frequency occurred. So there are two possibilities in your case, Yolanda. Antibiotics have an anti-inflammatory effect. And so many patients feel better when they take an antibiotic because it reduces inflammation in their bladder, not that it's killing an infection. So you get stuck. You keep thinking it's bacteria. You feel better on the antibiotic, but for many patients, it's just a very nice anti-inflammatory response. But the fact that going off the antibiotics makes all of your symptoms come back also, in my opinion, justifies you doing a next generation DNA urine test just to make sure you don't have some sort of funky infection going on that the antibiotic might be controlling. That next generation DNA urine test will identify good bacteria, bad bacteria, and fungal infection. David said it's not really painful. I also have an inflamed prostate and constipation. So again, well, urethral syndrome, as he said, the roots of urethral syndrome lie in the pelvic floor. So have you had your pelvic floor assessment? You have to refresh my memory because I work with so many patients. I don't really remember. Yolanda says, thank you, Jill. It makes sense. Very helpful. I will look into the testing. Sue says, I don't know what the connection is between pelvic floor pain and trauma, but I was also bullied severely because of dyslexia, even by my teachers, and that is why my texts are sometimes confusing. I do use talk to text, and sometimes it picks up, oh yeah, it picks up my talking. It's okay, honey. What's really funny is Kayleen and I play Fortnite. If there's anybody out there who wants to play Fortnite, believe it or not, adults play Fortnite, and we have a hella good time. We have a great time playing Fortnite together as adults. Anyway, we both have Alexa. And so if she says something to her Alexa, my Alexa on my end responds to what she's saying, and vice versa. And so sometimes we mess with each other by calling out funny songs. It's fun. David, you have not had a pelvic floor assessment. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Dude, this has been going on so long. The constipation could be by very tight pelvic floor muscles. The inflamed prostate could be because you have muscles so tight, they're restricting blood supply, causing inflammation. You might have nerves that are being squeezed by tight muscles. And I'm going to tell you right now, in my office, when I work with men directly, 95% of them have a muscle issues. 95%, easy. Now in clinical studies, it's 70%. But I can be quite the not vicious isn't the right word, detailed detective to try to go through a guy's history to try to figure out if there is a history of trauma. And seriously, if you rode bicycles, motorcycles, trail bikes, anything, absolute source for a lot of this issue is just riding bicycles or motorcycles. Breaking Through Chronic Pelvic Pain by Dr. Jerome Weiss. Then the IC Network shop in our book section. Breaking Through Chronic Pelvic Pain. Jerome Weiss. Weiss. This book is fabulous. Angel says she had to go back to the hospital. You do have pelvic floor dysfunction. I'm glad they found it. Now you're going to do the therapy? Rhonda said, I personally think that Botox is being used too much. I think we will hear later in years problems from that. I don't anticipate problems from it because it does wear off. I just think I agree with you. I mean, it is the perfect example of a non-productive therapy. It's not healing anything. It's just silencing nerves, but the nerves come back. And so, like, if you're in a wicked flare and you're just sick of the pain, go for it. I mean, you could go for it. But you can't use this as a treatment for the pain for the next 20 years. We got to get in there and fix the muscle. When we fix the muscle, you won't need the Botox. So we're going to fix the muscle with proper physical therapy. Hi, Serteria. Hey, girl, how are you? Angel said they took the catheter out of my belly to put it back in, and yes, oh, Angel, awesome! Yay, yay, yay. So you got the suprapubic catheter out. Excellent. And now it's time to do that physical therapy. Well done, girl. Serteria says she has hyperemia in the bladder. Okay. I have to refresh my memory on that. I don't remember what that is off the top of my head, so let me look at it. Interesting. Hold on. Hyperemia, according to Healthline, is an increased amount of blood in the vessels of an organ and tissues in the body. So active hyperemia occurs when you're exercising, and which increases the demand for blood in the muscles. Passive hyperemia is when blood can't properly exit an organ, so it builds up in the blood vessels. This type of hyperemia is known as congestion. So, pelvic congestion syndrome. So, Surgeria, pelvic congestion syndrome is where blood pools. The blood vessels have stretched out and now they're holding a large quantity of blood. And that gets very heavy. It feels like there's something heavy in your pelvis or a bowling ball in the pelvis. And so they have to treat that. And the way they treat that is with an interventional radiologist will treat that. And they will usually put like a stent in there to help it drain. Okay, now Angel said I got it backwards. They took the catheter out of my belly to put it back in. Okay, so they put it back in. Why did they put it back in? I don't understand. Did something happen when they took it out? Or were they just testing your ability to urinate? And then maybe if you weren't able to empty your bladder, they put it back in just to empty your bladder out? David, thank you so much for the 100 stars. Much appreciated. And you guys, I really appreciate if you find these meetings helpful, please come on over to the IC network and you can become a member and get our magazine. Ouch. This is where did I put it? Because I do my best work in the magazine. So we've been doing this magazine for 22 years now. So this is our latest one where we interview experts and we go through some of the latest research and also offer some really good self-help tips and things like that. So that, my goal with our magazine is to give you something new and interesting within 5 minutes. So this is not a brag piece. I don't talk about awards or anything like that in here. This is just information that I think will be directly helpful. And that's my goal, is I want you to pick it up and within 5 minutes find something useful that you can try. So this is the IC Optimist magazine, and we do 3 or 4 a year, depending upon the year. But you can also buy things in the IC Network shop, such as some of our popular supplements like Pre-Leaf, which is an acid reducer. Pre-Leaf sponsors the support group meeting. It's the most popular supplement. It's the oldest supplement that's been used out there. It's ideal for days like today when you're going to grandma's house and she's going to serve lasagna. Gosh darn it, the tomato and the lasagna, it's going to flare you. But if you take 2 Pre-Leaf, that's going to reduce 95% of the acid in that tomato sauce and make sure that that lasagna will not cause you a bladder wall flare if you're diet sensitive. So you can come on over to the IC Network shop and look at our supplements, and we've got books. Our book, IC 101, is not just a bladder disease. We've got heating pads, chair cushions. I'm sitting right now on this chair cushion. This is the chair cushion that I use when I have pelvic floor pain. But if you have pain in the center of your crotch when you sit down, pain in your urethra, your prostate, rectum, we also have a chair cushion for that. That is called our travel cushion that has a groove down the middle. So you'll find lots of things in the IC Network shop that might be quite helpful. Angel said they put it back in because you couldn't pee. Well, hey, at least they tried. And always have confidence in your body, Angel, because the human body, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is trying to heal whatever's going on. We just have to work on creating an environment that will support that healing. That's our goal here. So, Serturia, with your diagnosis, again, the closest comparable example that I can give you is pelvic congestion syndrome, and it usually happens in a very specific vein. And so I have to wonder if you have that. How did they propose treating it? Lori says, Jill, I need to give you my correct email. How can I do that? Lori, if you're doing that to get our free newsletter, just go on over to the IC Network website, and in the newsletter pull down menu, or here, hold on, let me look at it. I want to make sure you can enter it yourself, or so if you go to icnetwork.org and click on news and blogs, the second link is to the ICN newsletter. You can just enter it there. That's easy. But if we're talking about orders in the IC Network shop, or if you are an ICN member, you can pop an email to me, icnetwork@mac.com, or you can just call our order center on Monday and talk to Heather, and she will do that for you. Serturia said, is a hypertonic pelvic floor dysfunction curable? Absolutely, yes. Yes, it is. Muscles respond beautifully to muscle work. But you're not going to cure a muscle problem with a bladder treatment. You got to get in there and work directly with the muscle. And that's through pelvic floor physical therapy. And the only caveat there, the question that you ask the physical therapist is, are my muscles responding to therapy, or are they always locking back down into tension? If your muscles are always getting tight, no matter what they do, that's when we have to take a step back and we have to look at what puts pressure on muscles, which is actually bones. You could have one leg that's a half an inch longer than the other. What does that do? That tilts the pelvis. We want to get the hips level, so they might give you an insert in your shoe. I have a 1/4 inch insert in my right shoe that I wear, and it's amazing how beneficial that little 1/4 inch insert has been. Um, if you limp, if you have a bad knee, if you have a bad hip, that is going to put pressure on your pelvic floor and keep your muscles tight. So you are an anatomical mystery to be solved, and we have to try to figure stuff out here. They didn't say, they said it was just extra blood and vessels, and I never got information about it. They told me that hyperemia is consistent with IC. It would be nice to know the context where they gave you that diagnosis. Did they say that to you after you had a hydrodistension? So my brain is going in two ways. When they stretch the bladder to do a hydrodistension, it causes the small blood vessels to become very inflamed and visible, and sometimes they even spot. You even get red dots on your bladder wall. And I think in some circumstances, some doctors could say that that more visible capillaries, some could throw out that diagnosis without qualifying it by saying that happened because you stretched the bladder. When you stretch the bladder, you're basically kind of tearing tissue, and you're stretching you're just stretching tissue. There is some research which has talked about something called angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is the growth of small blood vessels. And I'm just trying to remember I know that that research was coming out of Japan, but I haven't heard any of the top IC doctors ever in 30 years apply the word hyperemia to IC. And I don't necessarily understand the context of why at that moment, what were they doing at that moment to give you that diagnosis? Do you remember? So you said yes. Is that they told you you had that after you had a hydrodistension? Angel says my muscles have been tight since I had a baby. Yeah, that's what happens. That's a huge risk factor for pelvic floor dysfunction is having a baby. So you need to go to physical therapy, hun. You need to go to physical therapy to work on those muscles, get those muscles healthier. The sad fact is that in the United States, unlike in many other countries, women are not sent to physical therapy after having a baby when they should. They should be. So Angel, you need to go have a proper pelvic floor assessment, and let's see why those muscles are tight. They were probably torn during delivery. Ah. Jody said, "Where is the flare guide located on the website?" So our section on flares is under self-help, the second link, managing IT flare. Our flare management guide is a 40-page publication that you get for free when you sign up for our newsletter over on the IT Network website. Or you can buy it in the store. But it's our gift, it's our incentive to get patients to sign up to receive our newsletter. Thaisa said, I've had Botox treatments for the last 5 years, but now my bladder no longer responds to it. I think it actually made it worse, and now nothing works. I agree with Jill. This is not healing anything. I wish I knew more about pelvic floor therapy so that I could have started it earlier. I had Botox again in February, and it just makes it harder to avoid and no longer helping with urgency, frequency, and pain. I have been in so much pain, and my muscles are so weak, so straining will put me into a huge flare. So Thaisa, go get a muscle assessment now. Haven't you done that yet? I mean, listen, once you start working with those muscles, they should perk right up. Serteria said she did Botox as well. Yeah. I mean, this is why we've really been focusing, and I'm really proud that of the work that we've done and that I've done specifically in these meetings for so long, because I love that the language that I've used is now in doctors' offices and in other IT experts' offices, and that is making sure that you as a patient are differentiating between cause and effect. Cause and effect. Your symptoms are the effect. We have to find the underlying cause. And that's why we do phenotyping, and we've been doing that for about 7 or 8 years now. In doctors' offices, they skip away from the concept of cause. Many of them just say you have an incurable bladder disease. But again, that's now disproven, and our national guidelines now say that there's no disease process happening in the great majority of bladders. There's no disease process found. The only patients with a disease process happening are patients with Hunner's lesions or patients with chronic UTI. So Serteria said she did Botox for pelvic floor and it didn't help my pain. You have severe pain after you pee. So Serteria, again, the question that you have to ask the physical therapist is, did my muscles respond, or did they always lock back down into tension? If your muscles always lock back down into tension, even with physical therapy, that means that we've got a problem with bones. You have what we call a bony structure abnormality, like I do. So you might have a bad hip, you might have an SI joint that moves like mine does, you might have a broken tailbone, you might have a bad knee, or you might have a funky foot. We always have to look at bones to try to understand why muscles always lock back down into tension. And that pain that you're having after you urinate and after you have a bowel movement, especially if you're straining to have a bowel movement or straining to empty your bladder, that's all muscle. So the physical therapists that you saw may not have been trained properly. And I would really encourage you to get a second opinion from a certified physical therapist. Remember, our cases are going to exceed the expertise of most local physical therapists. Most physical therapists haven't been trained in pelvic floor work anyway. But when you've got pain and you've got neuromuscular issues, you're already exceeding the skill set of local urologists and local physical therapists. That's when we've got to up our game and go to somebody who has more training so that they can help us get to the bottom of that. Sue said here, Sue just made a really good point to Thaisa. Did your doctor tell you you need to also do physical therapy? My doctor will not continue with Botox unless, hold on. Unless Sue also does physical therapy because because Botox is really just a Band-Aid. Jody says, what about the PTNS protocol with the TENS unit? I'm going to try it. I'm waiting for my TENS unit to come. Worth a try. It can calm nerves down. I mean, I did it. Broke me out of a pretty significant flare to do the neuromodulation, but didn't fix anything. Lori said, how do you know which bones they might be? By how you move. That's the training of a physical therapist. And by you reading books like this, which will go through all of that. Invest in your knowledge. Got to get your knowledge level up. This book tells you where everything's located: bones, muscles, nerves, and how they mess each other up. Sue says, you literally have to call around and ask if they are certified in pelvic physical therapy, or they just stick you with whoever's available and they don't have them at every location. True. John says, I wish I could send 500 stars at once. Thank you, John. You're very, very welcome. That's very appreciated. Thank you so much. Serteria says she's not straining. That's good. Good that you're not straining. Anybody who's training to be or have a bowel movement, you got messed up muscles. But Serteria, you have messed up muscles too. I mean, you did physical therapy. I just want to know, what did the physical therapist find? Were your muscles responding or whatever? So, okay, I got to stand up and move around. Hold on. Oh, let me tell you, getting old. I've always been in really good health. I'm a former athlete, but oh man, is that tight. Right there. I am tight, right? That glute muscle right there is just so unhappy right now. Yikes. Here, hold on. Oh, there it is. Left leg every time. Lori says, like Betty Davis said, getting old ain't for sissies. I got to tell you, I love my 40s and I love my 50s. I did. I felt so young in my 50s, and I still feel young. I honestly, I still feel young, but my muscles are talking to me. I got TMJ, I got an SI issue, you name it, I've got it right now. And they're all muscle and nerve related. It's crazy. Angel said, "Why does my bladder contract so bad?" I don't know, hun. If you're having a bladder spasms are kind of, I describe a bladder spasm as the equivalent of your bladder screaming for help. And so bladder spasms often occur. Um, well, okay, like for me, I wrote an article, I wrote a blog on our website, Anatomy of an Utterly Ridiculous IC Flare. I wrote that blog, I don't know, like 20 years ago. And it was a stupid flare where my bladder ended up spasming. And so, again, this is long before we knew muscles were playing a role. And instead, going bladder disease, bladder disease. And I rebelled one day and I just refused to follow the diet. And like I started the morning with coffee or something. And then at lunch, I did like a smoothie with pineapple juice. And then at dinner, I had enchiladas with enchilada sauce, something like that. Three acid bombs in my bladder at once. And oh my God, I'll never forget that flare. And it was all my fault. And I had bladder spasms during that flare. Definitely. 100%. And so sometimes the bladder quivers. It's really just your bladder is just really, really super, super irritated. Your uterus is also sore. That's interesting. So I would want to look for endometriosis also, Soteria. Is there any chance that you have endometriosis that's affected both your uterus and your bladder, maybe? Rhonda said, glutes so tight, it took me over a month to be able to walk. I couldn't sit either. My glutes got so tight, then it goes into my lower back. It's the worst. Yeah. Yeah. Angel said they found large amounts of blood in the urine too. Yeah. Well, and so the fact that your and Sertoria was diagnosed with endometriosis in 2015. Okay. Um, not surprising. So, Angel, the fact that they found large amounts of blood in your urine at the time that your bladder was contracting, then that tells me that you have a bladder injury of some type. Something in your bladder's bleeding, or something's causing your bladder to bleed. So that's either going to be a really, really bad bladder infection, or it's going to be a really, really bad bladder wall injury from some sort of chemical exposure, like ketamine or chemotherapy. Um, David said, "Do you know if Detrol will help urethral syndrome?" Detrol is actually a medication for overactive bladder, which is designed to calm the nerves down that control frequency, urgency. It'd be an interesting experiment, but I wouldn't put it ahead of physical therapy. You need to get your tush into physical therapy, my friend. Don't waste your money doing these treatments. You need to go have a proper pelvic floor examination, and let's make sure once and for all if your pelvic floor is driving these symptoms for you. I bet you $100 they are. Sertoria said you had endometriosis on your uterus. Yeah, that's okay, hon. Got it. Not a problem. All right, guys. So I will stay as long as you have questions. But if you feel like we're done for the day, then we can be done for the day and we can all go take a walk. I finally went up and down I live on a big hill. I live in the hills of Sonoma County, California, and oh my God, guys, oh my God, you want to know what's going on here? They're canceling everybody's home insurance. Everybody's home insurance is getting canceled, like everybody in my neighborhood, because the fire 2 years ago burned down. I got 4 houses away, came over the hills right down towards our house. It didn't hit our street; it hit the street above our street. So my home insurance right now is $2,200 a year with State Farm, which um, we're pretty sure it's going to be canceled in June. And we can't, and there's no insurance companies writing policies right now here. Maybe AAA, maybe. So anybody knows of any small little funky independent home insurance companies, would you please let me know? We have to go to our state fair plan, which they do in Florida too, for those states like ours that are hit with natural disasters. And it could go from 2,000 a year to 8,000 a year, or even $13,000 a year for home insurance. If it goes to $13,000 a year, I am screwed. Who can afford that? That's $1,000, over $1,000 a month. My Social Security will be, if I work till I'm 70, it'll be $3,000 a month. That means I'll have to live on $2,000 a month. Then you got to take out your health insurance, which is going to be another $400 or $500. Then you got to do your power bill. My power bill in the winter is $400 a month. Before you know it, I'm going to be living on. Oh my God, it's just daunting. Maybe I'll turn my home into a rooming house for other patients with IC, and we can all live together. What do you think? We might have to do that. And that's always kind of been a fantasy of mine. So anyway, if anybody has insurance agents out there and they write home policies, please send me an email, icnetwork@mac.com, because if it's $13,000 a year, I just won't have home insurance. And if the house burns down, the house burns down. We'll have nowhere to go. Anyway, that's life in fire country right now. John says was finally diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. That and IC is a horrible combo. I've heard it's not uncommon to have both. Have you seen some connection between the two? Yes, honey, definitely. That puts you in the widespread pain phenotype for sure. We should go. Hey, you want to go into Zoom? And I'd love to hear more about that. I'd be happy to go into Zoom for a little bit. David said, come to New Jersey. I can rent a room to you. I think my insurance is $800. Well, you never know at this point in time. I try to have an open mind. I'm going to try to have an open mind here. If Diane lived in New Jersey and she helped me start the IC network, this is life right now. It's very, very weird. It's just my family's here. My best friend and I could live. We decided that we would try to live together if this happened. So I'm just trying to work. And my goal is to keep the IC network functioning until I'm 70. But we might keep the IC network functioning until I'm 90. We'll see. Luckily, knock on wood, there's no dementia in our family. And everybody lives until they're very old, unless they're smokers. I mean, my dad lived till he was 100. Honestly, he was reading Scientific American a month before he died. And I appear to have inherited his genes, hopefully, because I also inherited his heart and high blood pressure. But again, as he said, I lived till I was 100. He said, Jill, I'm 100 years old. You're going to live a long time. So you had, Serteria said she had endometriosis on her ureters. Yikes. That's a very delicate surgery. Lizzie says, can PTSD trigger UTIs? No. Post traumatic stress disorder is not going to trigger a UTI because a UTI is caused by bacteria or fungi or a virus. There's no way that PTSD is going to trigger a UTI. What PTSD is going to trigger is your brain being stuck into a constant state of fight or flight, which means that your muscles are going to be very, very, very tight. And when you have very tight pelvic floor muscles, it's going to feel like a UTI, but your cultures are going to come back negative. We deal with a lot of PTSD in the IC patient population and with patients who have widespread pain. Angel said, I froze again. I don't know why. You guys are on YouTube, you're on Comcast. Facebook is on YouTube. I mean, I've got two different internets, so you're not interacting with each other. Donna says it's good. Excellent. Great, Donna. Thank you. David said, what's the company that does the next generation test? Microgen DX. Microgen DX standing for diagnostics. David, I'm sensing a little bit of resistance from you about getting your muscles checked. Am I right? I want to tell you the story of a man that I worked with. And actually, it was his 38-year-old man, in terrible shape. His mother called me. His elderly mother called me. This is the IC network, yes. Can you help my son? He's in so much pain. I'm like, sure, I'd be happy to try to. I mean, sincerely, absolutely try to help. Got him on the phone. And he was a gym owner. Owned a gym. Very, very, very successful athlete. So, we kind of go over his symptoms, not diet sensitive, but extreme pain and discomfort and symptoms of frequency, urgency. And I was like, all right, well, what do you do? I mean, what's your day like? And he goes, well, I'm an Ironman athlete. And he competed in the Hawaii Ironman. We're talking the elite of the elite of the elite triathletes. And I'm like going, ooh, light bulb. And it's like, so how many miles do you ride a week to train? He goes 100 miles a week. So I'm thinking immediately, okay, so he's been doing triathlons for at least 15 years. And my brain's going bike rider syndrome, cyclist syndrome, right? It's like, how can you not at this point in time when you're sitting on a bike for that long? And if you've ever, we have a lot of Olympic athletes out here and some pretty famous bike riders out here. And whenever you see them on the highways, man, those guys are fit. They got muscles like steel. They're an ounce of fat to be found on their tush. So they look really, really good in their bike shorts. Let me tell you, be quite honest. All right. Anyway, so I got this guy on the phone. It's like, how many miles do you ride? 100 miles a week. And I go, have you ever heard of bike rider syndrome? It's like, no. And I go, well, you know what happens when you sit on that hard seat? That seat is pushing directly into your muscles and nerves. And so this is actually really common in people who ride bikes for a long period of time. And so I said, it really sounds like you've got a pelvic floor injury. And I think it would be really good for you to go get a pelvic floor examination. And he got really angry with me. And he said, Jill, it's my bladder. It's my bladder. It's not my muscles. And he hung up the phone on me, just hung up, really angry at me. I'm like, okay. Well, he called back a couple weeks later. It's like, Jill, I'm in so much pain. I don't know what to do. It's so bad. I can barely function. It's like, did you go get your muscle checked? No, it's my bladder. I know it's my bladder. Stop talking about my muscles. It's my bladder. And he hung up the phone on me again. And that's really rare Like I've only been hung up on by him and one other patient in 30 years. Okay. Calls a third time. Then terrible shape, crying on the phone. Dude, what do you have to lose? Please, please. Look at what you do. The odds of you having a pelvic floor injury are very, very high. Based upon your training, would you please go get your muscles checked? And again, furious with me and hung up the phone. Well, about a month later, he called me from the parking lot of a physical therapist's office. He had just had his examination and he goes, "Oh my God, you were right." They said I actually have a really serious pelvic floor muscle injury. Now he had been treated with antibiotics for a year. So he had suffered for probably a year and a half with this severe injury, doing antibiotics, various prostate medications, bladder medications, antidepressants, you name it, all of that. Waste of time. If he had just gone and had a pelvic floor assessment, they would have found it. And I haven't heard from him since. And so I'm going to assume that he's better and back to doing Ironmans. I hope he is. David says he's going to look for a certified one. Excellent. You have Hunner's lesions too. Your lesions seem to be getting worse. Laxatives make them burn. A laxative makes your Hunner's lesion burn? Well, but laxatives don't end up in your bladder, they end up in your bowel and they cause muscle spasms, which makes the muscles burn. So, are you sure that the laxative is not causing your pelvic floor muscles to spasm and burn? Might be. And John said it's really not that bad to have a PT check your muscle. Yeah, it's really quick and easy, to be quite honest. Sudaria said, "Is there any way we can talk today?" Well, I can open up a Zoom and we can do a Zoom. Angel says, "Why does my bladder contract so bad?" And they found a large amount of blood in your urine. Angel, again, it's going to be infection or direct bladder wall injury from some sort of chemical exposure. It's bleeding. Why do we bleed? We get hurt or it gets infected. It's or it could be cancer. Bladder cancer can bleed. But they should have normally they do the cancer workup like your first appointment. If you're a smoker, you are running a very, very high risk of cancer. And the symptom of bladder cancer is often unexpected bleeding. So hopefully they've already looked inside your bladder to find the area that's bleeding to truly try to study it. So let me do this. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and start a Zoom meeting. And what we can do, since we're down to about 20 people between two platforms, um, for anybody who wants to come and talk to me or maybe be phenotyped, you can come into the Zoom meeting. So hold on, let me do that, and then here, hold on. If Zoom will open, there it is. Give me one sec. I'm always happy to talk to people individually. This next week is going to be kind of a busy week for me also, just know. So for people who are calling to talk, it's going to be harder to get a hold of me. I have a lot of meetings this week. The following week is better, but this week is medical visits, dental visits, physical therapists, going to a new physical therapist for my job. All right. So hold on a sec. Let me go ahead and start that. Okay, Zoom is started. Let me. All right. So for those of you on Facebook, here is the invite to Zoom. And hold on and let me email that to my other computer. I know there's probably a better high-tech way of doing it. I don't know what that is. I do want to try to take another walk today too. I'm not up to my big walks yet. All right, so hold on and let me post. So for anybody who wants to come in Zoom and talk about their pain, let me grab that and I'll go ahead and put it into there it is. That took a bit. Interesting. All right, so for YouTube, Sudaria, if you want to come into Zoom, that's fine. I'll hang out in Zoom for a little bit. Otherwise, you can call later this week, like Thursday or Friday. Okay. Dang it. Okay, so you both have Zoom links. So what we're going to do is, okay, I've got 2 people come into Zoom so far. So you guys hold tight. Just give me a minute. So for everybody else, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. And I really wish you the best. And may you have a wonderful week this week. And hopefully I will be here next Sunday. Knock on wood. Knock on wood. Come on over to the IC Network if you're looking for more information on IC. If you find these meetings helpful, please make sure you click like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff so you get notices when we go live. All right. All right. Sudaria's just come in. So I got 4 people in Zoom. If anybody else wants to come into Zoom, come on in now because I'm going to shut down the rest of the support groups. So we're going to say goodbye right now to YouTube. Bye, YouTube. See you later. All right. YouTube